So, when you talk about capability building, what is the real problem you are trying to fix?
Capability building is an HR job, training is an HR job, or I'll do training when I'm required. I'll go to a capability building session whenever I have free time, which means that the ownership is not there at the level of the line leaders. If somebody has a fever, you prescribe go and take a paracetamol. The solution to that is finding that root cause, but very few organizations are able to go down that path and understand where that gap is.
Now, the good thing today is with AI, the ability to contextualize for everybody has gone up 100x. Organizations, when they're doing internal capability building, their learning teams can very easily use AI to generate very tailored situation scenarios to give to participants.
Most organizations invest heavily in learning and development, but very often the business struggles to see what actually changed afterwards. Because the real challenge usually isn't training, it's behavior change. People attend programs, go through workshops, complete certifications, and then go back to doing exactly what they were doing before. In manufacturing, you can't hide from that. When capability building doesn't work, it shows up immediately in quality, productivity, and missed deadlines. Today, I'm talking to someone who deals with this reality every single day. Amit Sharma is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Gokaldas Exports, one of India's largest apparel manufacturers. 40,000 employees, multiple factories, and an environment where performance is visible every day on the shop floor. And joining us is John Cherian, founder and CEO of enParadigm, who works with organizations on turning learning into actual performance. So, this isn't a conversation about theory or trends, it's about what it really takes to get people to work differently at scale. Let's get into it. Amit, I want to start with something simple. In your world, if people don't perform, you see it immediately. Quality drops, maybe deadlines slip, costs go up. So when you talk about capability building, this isn't theoretical. What is the real problem you are trying to fix?
So the real problem which the capability building is fixing is not that people don't know enough. It's about how do you translate your strategy into consistent execution. And I am stressing on this word consistent because this is where the issue happens, and this is where the gap is between organizations which are successful in building the capabilities versus organizations which are not that successful. And there are various paradigms to it if you really start looking at it. What is that? Number one, there is a major gap between what we call as intent versus output. Now all companies, they look at it from a point that they know what they want. They know they need better customer experience, better cycle time, lower cost, better quality. You will hear it everywhere. All these strategic documents, vision documents will all talk about. But the reality is that the day-to-day decisions don't give these outcomes. You know, and it's not because people are lazy or they don't know, but the issue is that they lack repeatable skills. The skills which can be put to use on an everyday basis, giving consistent results. People lack right judgment frameworks. what to do in a particular situation? Do they know that? And this is where the challenge happens. So that is the first paradigm, which these capability building programs need to solve, is that how do you really focus on building repeatable execution muscle in the organization? And it's not the strategy deck, it's not what the company's vision is around that. Second important piece, which is there, and it's a very critical piece, is if you look at an organization, where is the performance getting killed? It gets killed where there is variability. There's one team which will be doing exceptionally well and another team which is not doing that well. And we start thinking, hey, what's really happening around that? Why it is that when the two teams have been paired with the same resources, same kind of environment, same culture, same organization, why there is this gap? And that's where again the capability piece comes in, that how do we reduce the performance volatility in the organization so that I can get repeatable performance, or rather consistent performance across various teams which are there in the organization. Third important paradigm, Prajjal and John, is about the fact that many times we say that managers can't coach what they don't master. So what happens is, when people are growing in an organization, generally you will find that somebody is a great performer, let's make the person a manager. The functional skills matter much more than the behavioral aspects or the managerial capability. Now what happens is, since they themselves are so proficient in doing things the way they would be doing it, they don't focus on building skills. If there's something is wrong happening somewhere, they themselves will jump into it and try to solve the problem, rather than trying to build the capability in the team that, hey, now I'm a manager. I need to ensure that my team's capability rises, and I need to really coach them, and they really need to invest in their capability building so that the organization grows. But the real issue which we're trying to solve are these, because if we are able to work on these elements, this is where the capability building works, and this is where the organization's strength starts to really happen, and the core becomes really solid.
So you think it is the problem is that it's always a helicopter view, and the business is not able to identify the real problems. But do you think the managers are capable enough to identify the real problems, that this is how training should be done, or this is what needs to be done? Where does it needs intervention?
Right. One part is about the managers. The second part is also about, as an organization, investing in capability building, so that, as I said, all teams are growing equally. There is no variability in the performance. The level of skills or level of capabilities which are there across various teams are consistent. It shouldn't happen that there is a hero team and then there's a zero team. Then it means that we are really not investing in capability building in the organization. Then we are relying on a few stars in the organization to make things happen.
Sure. John, when you know hear that, how common is this really? Do most organizations get this specific about what they are trying to fix?
Normally in the L&D space, there is a lot of English that we use, right? We talk about leadership, we talk about communication, we talk about collaboration, right? But on the floor, a lot of execution has to happen seamlessly, right? And there's always that, slip between the cup and the lip, right? So what I hear in any kind of a training intervention, it sounds very good when I hear the English, right? But on the floor, a lot of specific behaviors are required, specific skill sets are required, and that many times the translation becomes a challenge. What I understand in the classroom versus what I have to do on the field or on the shop floor, that gap is there, right? And we've seen organizations which go very specific over here. For example, in another, you know, uh, export apparel export organization where we worked, right? To improve the productivity of the team, a complete job motion analysis was done, right? Who are the people working in the assembly line? What stitching process or manufacturing process do each of them do? What kind of motions or movements their body has to go through to produce the garment, right? And where can that be optimized, right? And after the job motion analysis, a re-engineering was done on in the assembly line, that given this, if you make the garment produced using this kind of process, the amount of effort, movement, technique, everything changes, and you're able to produce things in a much more optimum way, right? Now that is something which directly adds value to the company's bottom line, because you're able to reduce the cost of manufacturing. You're also able to look at things from a quality perspective. That's a very different kind of example compared to what many times companies try and do from a learning perspective.
Okay, so that's a real time exercise that you do. So you follow a process, or there you use technology as well to come up with these kind of solutions.
Both, definitely both, right? So there are times when a lot of things are about the organization's ground reality. There are times when, for example, what we would do many times is we would simulate an organization's ground reality, right? Simulate the situations that you encounter, simulate the kind of customers that you interact with, or the kind of people that you work with. So if you can simulate to a very close reality, then you can give people in the learning session a very real experience, right? And then they can try for themselves that if I tried behavior A or an approach A, how effective or impactful is it versus if I tried a behavior B or approach B, right? So that way you can try and incorporate a lot more specificity and very sharp feedback into the overall program design.
Okay, uh, Amit, I'll come to you next. Give me one example, not a program or a real, you know, a real situation where something wasn't working when and you had to step in and fix it.
Yeah, multiple such examples were there, but if one comes to my mind on top of it, there was this issue in an organization where once we get a call from the head of our business. It was few years back in another organization, and that Amit, we need to get some training done to people because of I think they are not able to deliver the project in time, and probably they need some training. Now that's how it was positioned, and the fact, and and there is also a need for some kind of a counseling support, because there was in that team some people were also really crying that we are not able to do that. Now on the surface of it, that's how it came up, now very interestingly, and I told my boss, I said, let me get into it, let me get to the detail of it, that what really is really happening. And it's not about the fact that okay, I heard you, but there may be something more to it, and it's not just always about the fact that a particular somebody needs training is not the solution, without really understanding the context of it, that what are we really trying to do on the self, or what training or what is required. And more than that, I have always believed that more than the training, the capability building piece is more important than the training is a more, it's very generally used, very loosely used term in organization, and it's a term where anytime anybody and there's any people problem or any issue which is there, the first reaction of a leader is that go and get a, put them into a training program, and after the training program things will change as if there will be some magic wand which will happen suddenly over there. I went into it, met people across that various element. It was about 20 member strong team who were working on that project, and met almost everybody of them, try to understand what the issue was. And I really realized that what we thought about, that it was a sense, a counseling support or a training program to manage project well. That was really not the issue. The real issues were something else. The real issue was the fact that, number one, the manager over there was somebody who really wanted to prove himself against all odds, that I can do it much better than others. And in that piece, he was just trying to push everybody and that had actually disengaged people. The person had also hired people who were more loyalists to the person rather than having the right capability. And then they were he tried to kind of was trying to work with that and try to deliver on that project, which just couldn't have happened. And then they made some unrealistic timelines were committed. And it was also one interesting aspect was the fact that since this person used to was so much focused around the timeline that he used to come on weekends, Sundays, and his expectation was the entire team would also come, and then suddenly team revolted that we can't do it. And so what was felt like a training program will solve a problem, it was not about that. It was more about the fact that uh, we needed we needed a different approach around it. It was more a leadership problem, behavioral problem, and then we had to kind of bring it down to that level that what's really happening, and hence accordingly we were able to then deal with that situation. Spoke to everybody, counseled the managers, also looked at the team composition, re-looked at the team composition around it. Also, there was some element of gap, which was also about the fact that some the capability gaps were also fixed around that. Some people were also sent abroad, to the parent company to also understand how certain some of these projects work. And then in the end, things started going on track. So sometimes we also feel that what it looks like on the surface is not really the real issue when we go deep down it.
Yeah, so you need people with different sets, different capabilities, and different thing. So in your case, what happened? The uh, manager had to be again coached, or
Yeah. So many people said, let's change the manager. The initial thing was, let's change the manager. And they said, changing the manager is not the solution. We need to help build the capability. He's a great guy. He has delivered to the organizations earlier also. It's not that the person doesn't know his stuff. Just that maybe, yes, he has landed in this situation, which is not a desirable situation. But how do we back up our team members? It's equally important. So leadership is also about the fact that when you are backing your solid guy when the chips are down, you can't just say let me keep him out. It's about the understanding that okay, we in this situation certain chinks in the armor have been exposed. How do I plug them? So what are the capability gaps which have got exposed in this entire piece? Because nobody is perfect. It is, and then let's start building that. Let's ensure that we have the right interventions where those capability gaps are built. You really need to back your people. The use and throw just doesn't work, and just a sending to a training program also doesn't work.
John, what is your experience? How do you customize things? If a client came to you with a similar situation, what Amit faced, how would you deal with it?
Yeah, so I think the challenges that Amit has highlighted are very real, right? The last mile contextualization is where most learning inputs fail, right? Uh, Now, the good thing today is with AI, the ability to contextualize for everybody has gone up 100x, right? So, organizations, when they're doing internal capability building, their learning teams can very easily use AI to generate very tailored situation scenarios to give to participants. Situations which earlier required a lot of creativity and imagination, or lot of context as well. But now, a lot of that is available to you, if you know how to use AI well, right? For client companies like us, we use a lot of technology, and we are able to actually simulate those kind of situations using technology, right? So clients can create tailored situations, and they are able to very easily simulate a very close context situation for their requirement, right? And this kind of technology was not available 2 years back, right? It's very new.
Amit, say suppose from what you have seen, where do you think the most capability initiatives actually break down?
if I give you an honest answer, they break down because, or rather, they will break down in organizations where it is not seen as a business activity but seen as an HR activity. If the if that okay, capability building is an HR job, training is an HR job, or I'll do training when I'm required. I'll go to a capability building session if whenever I have free time, which means that the ownership is not there at the level of the line leaders in terms of driving that. That is the way. That is the one major reason why most of the capability program will fail, because the line has not even accepted that. The leaders have not accepted that, because the day they will accept that my people need to go and attend a capability building session program or whatever intervention we are trying to do in whatever format, whether it's a classroom session, it's a mentoring session, or it's a on the job learning. That's when things will start to happen, because people ultimately look up to their manager, what their manager is going to tell them.
So you think it is the problem is that it's always a helicopter view, and the business is not able to identify the real problems. But do you think the managers are capable enough to identify the real problems, that this is how training should be done, or this is what needs to be done? Where does it needs intervention?
Yes and no both. I'm not saying that the business is not able to do that. What I'm saying is, if they will not do that, this will happen. So successful organizations are the ones where they do that. That's where the depth is. That's where you find repeatability. That's where you find consistency. And organizations where these things are not there, that's where the gap happens. And it's not just about when you talk about, do managers have the capability? That's what we need to build.
John, Amit made a very valid point. He said that the problem starts when you don't see capability building as an business agenda rather than seeing it as an HR agenda, because that is where you don't get actually what kind of training each individual would need or each team member would need. Instead of having a helicopter view of the entire thing, of the entire organization, you need to be very specific. He gave examples about if sales managers are not able to convert certain things at a certain price, that needs to be taken care of. What has been your experience? Has clients come to you with very clear brief, or they generally come with an helicopter view and say that, John, we need training for this organization, or we need capability building for this entire team? How does it happen?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, Prajjal. I'd like to maybe give you an anecdote over here. One of our FMCG clients once came to us, and the L&D team had told us that, what, our problem statement is that we need to make people better at data analytics, right? And we need people to look at, so we asked, what do you mean by getting better at data analytics? What is your problem statement? So the L&D team said, we want people to look at data creatively and laterally, right? And they should get better at that, right? And if you can make them do that, then the program has succeeded, right? Now, obviously, this brief did not give us any specifics, right? However, what happened was then we got connected to the zonal managers and the national sales head, right? And their problem statement really was that when there is a market share problem, or when there's a revenue or a growth problem, you know, uh, you can get to know about it by the 20th of the month, right? So by the 20th of the month, you know whether you're MTD, whether you're on track with your numbers or whether you're behind numbers. And you have the last 10 days of the month to ensure that you somehow hit your numbers, right? So on the 20th of the month, an area sales manager is supposed to look at the data, and they're supposed to identify, is this a challenge with a competitor brand that we are facing? Because some new brand or some other brand has done something in the market, or is it a challenge with one of our distributors going slow, not upset with us, not working with us? Is it a challenge with a sales rep in the distributor's end, that they are not following their beat? Has some large retailer shut down, or is there a conflict between a very large retailer and the distributor? you know Or are the salespeople going on the wrong route? Is there absenteeism on the route? So these are all very specific problem statements, right? So the business leaders were able to articulate how, if you go through the organization's MIS, you're able to identify that this is the gap, right? And then what they really wanted was to train all the area managers in a systematic way of doing this analysis, right? Because most area managers would come back and say, there's a brand problem. The problem is a brand problem. That is why I'm not able to sell, right? Whereas when you actually diagnose and do the root cause, it may have nothing to do with the brand, right? The problems could be n other kind of problems, right? So I think it's important for anyone who's trying to diagnose a learning problem to, get in terms of what actually is happening on the ground.
That is what I believe is lacking in the industry. People see it from an a very top down approach, helicopter view. A very homogeneous solution that they have. Amit, tell me.
No, what happens, Prajjal, just want to add to
Yeah,
something here.
yeah,
Just
yeah. Sure, sure.
it's like if somebody has a fever, you prescribe go and take a paracetamol. And that's how the training has become. Without diagnosing that, is it due to viral fever? Is it due to any bacterial infection? Is it due to jaundice? Is it due to typhoid? Is it due to any kind of upset stomach? It can be hundreds of reasons. Fever is a symptom. It's body's reaction to fight the microbes which are attacking the body. But and the solution to that is not taking a paracetamol. The solution to that is finding that root cause. But very few organizations are able to go down that path and understand where that gap is, and then do that, plug that. So I would say they are more busy in managing the capability gaps rather than closing the capability gaps.
The problem is that everybody wants to, put it under the carpet rather than trying to solve it, rather than trying to find out a solution. How to manage? You rightly said.
I think John was saying something.
Yeah, I was just saying very similar. One of our, I was just looking at Amit's paracetamol example. So one of our, IV fluid clients once came and said that, in their biggest sales that do not happen in the metros, they happen in tier three cities, right? Why? Because regardless of what issue the patient has, the doctor will catch them and immediately give them IV fluid.
They will
Yeah,
put them
yeah.
on
So I
IV.
think
Yes.
in a
Yeah.
sense, very similar to what Amit was highlighting. Yeah.
Certainly. Interesting. Interesting. Amit, when you invest in capability building, what actually tells you it's working? You know, you, what I mean is what changed on the ground that, you say that, yes, this has been an effective capability building exercise.
So the key piece is that when you actually see that things are working without escalations or not as many escalations as they used to be earlier, things are now working in a better way. When you see that performance become less dependent on specific individuals, and that is more carrying across everywhere, that means it's working. If I don't hear from the manager saying that, hey, don't move this person, this business will collapse or this function will collapse, rather than says, okay, fair enough, I have enough strength, bench strength, and I have enough depth of the capability. Even if you move this person out, nothing will change. The performance remain stronger. That's when we see that, I would say, things are really well. When the teams are not panicking when the rules are changing. When there is variance is really less in terms of the instead of one team versus the other. Those gaps are less.
The greatest example, I think, is the movie Sholay. Every bit, every role had its own contribution and its own meaning. If you see it this way. So But yes, I agree, it is all about the mindset. I think we are, as a society, we think, in chaos, if we don't, when there is a pressure, and if we don't make it a chaotic situation, we feel that, things are not moving. If it is calm, then we say, oh, kuch nahi ho raha hai.
We have got used to that, rather than that's the paradigm which we need to change. The other day I was interviewing a person. I said, why are you looking for a change? He said, no, I have got very comfortable there. I said, okay, then it's good. So how have you reached that stage? Oh, I have done this, I have done that, I have built the capability, I have, I have built the right team. Now I don't think there is anything else for me to do. I said, then wait, then you need to aspire for your next role. But no, but I'm getting bored. Now, how can this is not about getting bored? It's about then how do you really do take the next steps in your career? But people sometimes look at like that, and if there is no action happening, something is not happening, and people equate learning with action rather than learning with capability building.
Yes, John. Why do you think it is so hard to connect learning to real business outcomes? And where do you think the organizations are getting wrong when they try to measure it?
Yeah, so learning is about someone's knowledge, skills, maybe to a little bit extent attitude, little bit extent habit, right? So I think that's what learning can influence, right? Whereas business performance has so many factors which are all interlinked.
Amit, what's that one mistake you see organizations making again and again in this space? Wonderful. I think that was a great conversation today. And I think an insightful one. I'm sure, if we continue this, it can go on for uh, hours. Actually, there is so much to talk about. But thank you, Amit. Thank you, John, for your time.